In the dim corridors of forgotten archives, silence holds its breath, as if the paper itself remembers what men tried to erase. Shadows bleed from sealed envelopes, whispers from vanished files echo like distant artillery. Each page torn from history leaves only scars, clues too dangerous to speak aloud, yet too heavy to bury. What survives is not the whole truth, but fragments stitched together by omission, a mosaic of secrets waiting for the brave to glance beneath the blackout ink. In the closing days of the Second World War, Europe existed in a haze of retreating armies, fragmented command structures, and desperate last-ditch operations. On the night of April 14, 1945, just 3 weeks before Hitler's suicide, the WWII Kriegsmarine initiated a clandestine movement out of Kiel harbor. It was not a formal evacuation, nor did it appear on any official war diaries. Known in a handful of intercepted communications as Unternehmen Eclipse, Operation Eclipse, the Convoy was composed of 3 cargo ships, 2 torpedo boats, and a small escort of minesweepers. Witnesses later testified that the cargo ships were guarded more heavily than even U-boat refueling tenders, and that SS officers, not Kriegsmarine staff, supervised the loading. The war diary of the 2nd U-boat flotilla briefly mentions special cargo units transferred to Convoy Eclipse, departure 2200 HRs. Before that line was struck out with thick black ink in the archived copy. The erased section survived in only one carbon duplicate, found decades later in a British collection of decrypted Enigma traffic. What was being shipped was never identified. A dock worker interviewed by British intelligence in May 1945 described sealed containers, steel crates with radiation warnings stenciled in red, guarded by men with black uniforms and skull insignia. Others recalled wooden crates marked only with the letters UR and WWII. The convoy sailed east into the Baltic rather than west toward Norway as expected. This detail immediately drew Allied attention, since Soviet forces had, by then, advanced as far as Stettin and Danzig. Yet neither the Royal Navy nor the Soviet Baltic Fleet reported intercepting such a group. British Naval Intelligence Section 3, NID 3, drafted a memorandum on May 10, 1945, suggesting the convoy may have been carrying materials associated with the German nuclear program. The memo referenced uranium oxide shipments that had been tracked in February from Oranienburg, near Berlin, to Kiel by rail. Decrypted ultra messages confirmed the presence of a Dr. Kurt Diebner, a physicist attached to the German Army Ordnance Office in Kiel on April 13th. His subsequent whereabouts remain unrecorded. In June 1945, when Allied forces gained access to Kiel naval archives, no references to Operation Eclipse were found. In fact, many convoy logbooks from April had been deliberately burned. Only fragments remained in cipher intercepts. A US Navy report, declassified only in the 1990s, indicated that a British submarine, HMS Venturer, had picked up unusual hydrophone signatures of multiple surface vessels in the Bornholm area on April 16th. Venturer was ordered to shadow, but the trail was abruptly lost. The report included a curious annotation. Subject convoy may have been intercepted by Soviet elements unconfirmed. Soviet sources muddy the trail further. In 1958, a defector named Viktor Suvorin, a former officer in the Soviet Navy's intelligence directorate, claimed that divers had located wreckage near Bornholm in the early post-war years. He described burned-out freighter hulls, stripped bare of cargo, long before divers arrived. He suggested that Soviet naval intelligence had recovered items of interest, but these were spirited directly to Leningrad and never appeared in official reports. No Soviet archival file referencing Operation Eclipse has ever been released. There is another possibility that the convoy never reached Bornholm at all. A Luftwaffe signal intercepted on April 15th noted the loss of contact with Convoy E-17 due to engine interference and sabotage risk. The meaning remains unclear. Some historians have speculated that the vessels may have scuttled themselves to prevent capture, or that British Special Operations Executive (SOE) units could have intervened. Yet no SOE after-action reports mention a Baltic operation of this scale. The convoy seems to have simply disappeared into the fog of war. Theories surrounding its cargo remain speculative but consistent. Several declassified US Army Counterintelligence Corps reports from 1946 include references to uranium salt cakes and experimental radar arrays, thought to have been evacuated from central Germany by SS technical units. Other reports suggest advanced Würzburg-Riesa radar dishes and experimental centimeter-wave transmitters. Still others whisper of half-complete jet engine prototypes or rocket fuselages. The fact that Allied intelligence devoted multiple memoranda to Eclipse in the summer of 1945 indicates that they believed the cargo had strategic significance, not just routine munitions. Perhaps the most chilling note lies in an overlooked entry. Within the minutes of the Combined Intelligence Objectives Subcommittee, CIOS, dated July 9, 1945. The entry reads, "It is believed that Soviet naval units recovered Eclipse cargo, possibly radioactive in nature." Cross-reference to file Alsos Diebner. The Alsos mission was the Allied operation tasked with seizing German nuclear research. Yet Diebner was never interrogated by Alsos. His name vanishes from Western records in April 1945 and only reappears in 1949, when he surfaces as a nuclear consultant in West Germany, never prosecuted and curiously untouched by denazification tribunals. In the absence of conclusive evidence, Operation Eclipse remains one of the Baltic's great unsolved mysteries. No manifest survives, no photographs of the cargo exist, and the vessels themselves, likely scuttled or destroyed, lie somewhere beneath the sea. For decades, fragments of rumor and redacted files have been pieced together by historians and intelligence researchers. Some point to uranium shipments bound for an imagined Nazi nuclear program in Norway. Others suspect experimental radar or sonar equipment later incorporated into Soviet systems. A minority whisper about weapons projects so advanced that even the Allies could not risk their disclosure. What is undeniable is the pattern of deliberate erasure. German records destroyed, British intercepts censored, Soviet reports locked in archives, American memoranda classified for half a century. The consistent absence of verifiable data suggests more than the fog of war. It suggests a coordinated suppression. Whether that suppression was to conceal Allied intelligence failures, to mask the transfer of German technology to Soviet custody, or to prevent public panic over nuclear materials in the Baltic, remains unanswered. To this day, divers occasionally report unusual wreckage off Bornholm and in the Gulf of Gdansk. None has been conclusively linked to Eclipse. The last official Western reference appears in a US Navy intelligence briefing of 1952. Operation Eclipse, status unresolved, cargo presumed compromised, subject closed. After that, the file was buried. Operation Eclipse lingers not as a footnote, but as a gap, an erasure at the heart of Europe's most documented war. What precisely vanished into the Baltic in April 1945 may never be recovered. What remains are shadows in archives, erased logbooks, and the faint trace of a convoy that departed Kiel under moonless skies, never to be seen again. The Allied invasion of North Africa, codenamed Operation Torch, commenced on November 8, 1942. The landings at Oran, Algiers, and Casablanca marked the first major Anglo-American ground operation of the war. In the chaos of advancing units, naval bombardments, and rapidly shifting Vichy French loyalties, few noticed a small but extraordinary intelligence find in the city of Oran. According to fragmentary British and American files, a cache of documents was seized from the local headquarters of the Vichy French Intelligence Bureau. The collection included correspondence between French officials and German Abwehr agents, as well as reports forwarded from Berlin outlining chemical warfare contingency plans for the Mediterranean theatre. The discovery was described in a memorandum from the British First Army's intelligence branch, dated November 10, 1942. Large quantity of enemy documents recovered from Oran, classified as War Department Series. Papers contain reference to Axis chemical stores, gas warfare trials in Sicily, and shipment routes via Marseille. The memorandum, preserved in the UK's National Archives under the deceptively bland file title North Africa, Captured Material, was heavily redacted until the 1990s. Among the redactions, the phrase Oran Papers appears faintly in penciled notes by an archivist, the only surviving reference to what may have been one of the most sensitive intelligence seizures of the war. The files were reportedly placed under the custody of Major Robert D. Easton, a US Army G2 intelligence officer attached to 2 Corps. On November 11th, Easton arranged for their transport aboard HMS Sheffield, which was serving as escort in the area. The plan was to send the cache first to Gibraltar and from there to London for analysis by MI6's Section 8, specializing in enemy scientific intelligence. Yet when Sheffield docked at Gibraltar on November 13th, the documents were gone. The ship's log makes no mention of a transfer or loss. Easton himself submitted only a terse note. Papers missing during transit, cause unknown. What happened in those 2 days has never been satisfactorily explained. The simplest explanation is theft, perhaps by Axis sympathizers among the crew, or by opportunistic black marketeers. But the details suggest something more deliberate. Surviving crewmen interviewed by British Naval Intelligence in 1943 recalled that on the night of November 12th, a small party of Americans in plain uniform boarded Sheffield from a launch, remaining aboard for roughly 2 hours. Their presence was never logged. Several sailors insisted they saw crates labeled Confidential, War Department being offloaded, though the official ship's manifest denies any such cargo transfer. The subsequent paper trail is even stranger. On November 16th, MI6 filed a formal complaint to the American Office of Strategic Services, OSS, requesting an explanation for the disappearance. The OSS responded on November 18th with a terse cable. No record of War Department custody Oran. No such files exist. Yet 2 months later, in January 1943, a classified OSS field report from Algiers makes reference to German VX-type precursors noted in Oran papers. A chilling statement, since the nerve agent VX would not be publicly identified until the E-1950s. The phrase was later crossed out in thick black ink, replaced with mustard gas, an anachronism that suggests deliberate cover-up. British suspicions deepened after the war. In a 1946 Joint Intelligence Committee review, one analyst wrote, "There remains concern that certain Oran documents were withheld by our American allies for unilateral exploitation." The memo goes on to note that the missing files would have been of immense interest to chemical warfare specialists, particularly since the British had been racing to assess German capabilities in nerve agents such as Tarbon, first manufactured in 1939 by I.G. Farben. The Oran papers may have provided early evidence of these developments, evidence that disappeared into American custody or into a black hole. For decades, the subject lay dormant. Inquiries by British historians into captured intelligence archives turned up no mention of Oran beyond the 1942 and 1946 memos. The name itself seemed to vanish from the official record, as if deliberately excised. American archives were no better. Freedom of Information Act requests in the 1980s returned no hits on Oran papers, yet curiously, in a declassified 1952 US Army Chemical Corps report, buried in the appendices, appears a note. Mediterranean Documents, 1942, relevance to nerve gas storage facilities. The reference carries no context, but appears to connect directly to the vanished cache. The deeper implications are unsettling. By the late Cold War, both NATO and the Warsaw Pact were in possession of large stockpiles of nerve agents, Tabun, sarin, VX, descended from German wartime research. How much of this research was accelerated by early Allied access to Axis files remains debated. The disappearance of the Oran papers raises the possibility that the United States obtained a head start on nerve agent development years before the official capture of German chemical facilities in 1945. If true, the secrecy would explain why the files were suppressed. They pointed to knowledge acquired in 1942, not at war's end. Some have speculated that the Oran papers contained more than chemical warfare intelligence. One French historian, Jacques Morin, argued in a 1987 monograph that the cache may also have included details of French collaboration with the Abwehr, implicating senior Vichy officials beyond what was later admitted. If so, their disappearance would have been politically convenient both for the Free French government and for the Allies, eager to keep France stable in the post-war order. Such a theory would explain why both London and Washington showed little interest in pursuing the loss. The fate of Major Easton, the officer originally charged with transporting the files, adds another layer of mystery. After the war, he briefly served in the newly formed CIA before resigning in 1949 under health grounds. His obituary in 1961 makes no mention of Oran, but in a 1955 private letter uncovered by researchers, he cryptically wrote, "Some things that vanish are made to vanish, and we are told never to remember them." Whether he referred to the Oran papers is unknowable. By the time historians revisited Operation Torch in the 1970s and 1980s, the episode had been entirely erased from official campaign histories. Not a single mention of captured documents, missing files, or the Oran papers appears in the vast literature on the North African campaign. Only through scattered references in declassified intelligence papers has the ghost of the event resurfaced. Even today, both British and American archives contain unexplained gaps in November 1942 correspondence, as though certain folders were quietly lifted from the shelves long ago. If the Oran papers did contain the earliest Allied intelligence on German nerve agents, then their disappearance was not a loss at all. It was a transfer. Transferred from a multinational war effort into unilateral control, transferred from public history into a hidden Cold War arsenal, and perhaps most importantly, transferred from the realm of verifiable fact into the shadows, where historians can only speculate and piece together fragments. What remains is a void in the record, a silence louder than any denial. The Oran papers, whether stolen, concealed, or deliberately erased, remind us that the Second World War's archives are not only incomplete, they were made incomplete. The files did not simply vanish, they were made to vanish. By February 1945, the Eastern Front was collapsing in flames. The Red Army's Vistula-Oder offensive had shattered German defenses and carried Soviet forces deep into Silesia, within striking distance of Breslau and the Oder River. Yet, among the well-documented clashes, one inexplicable chapter lingers: reports of phantom divisions, artillery that roared, armored battalions that maneuvered, and entire enemy formations that later proved not to exist. Soviet archives mention them only in passing, in heavily redacted operational summaries, while German records are silent. Intelligence fragments, however, suggest a deception program known as Schattenheer, the Shadow Army. The first references come from intercepted OSS messages. A January 1945 cable from Berne, Switzerland, reported Abwehr agents boasting of ghost regiments, confusing Soviet advances in Lower Silesia. The Soviets, for their part, noted baffling patterns. A situation report from the First Ukrainian Front, dated February 18th, describes heavy sustained artillery fire from positions east of Breslau. Yet when reconnaissance patrols advanced, they found no emplacements, no guns, only scorched earth and empty dugouts. The report concludes, either rapid withdrawal under camouflage or deliberate feint. Enemy presence could not be confirmed. American and British intelligence already knew of German deception practices. The Sonderverband, Rabenau, and Wotan units had experimented with false radio traffic, dummy armor, and sound simulators, but Schattenheer appeared to be something else entirely. Not mere decoys, but fragments of real Waffen-SS battalions deliberately blended with fictitious divisions, moving in and out of existence in the fog of war. The purpose was to convince the Soviets that German defenses remained intact long after they had dissolved. A declassified British War Office assessment, written in April 1945, provides chilling detail. It references fabricated order of battle maps captured from retreating German officers near Görlitz. The maps listed formations such as the 609th Volksgrenadier Division and the 11th SS Panzergrenadier Brigade, units that no historian has ever verified. Yet they appeared on Soviet operational charts, noted as active enemy divisions. The War Office analyst concluded, the Shadow Army must be understood as an intentional projection of phantom strength, achieved through controlled leaks, false documents and scattered detachments acting as anchors for entire non-existent divisions. What remains unexplained is the ferocity with which Soviet commanders described facing these units. Veterans of the 5th Guards Army, interviewed in the 1960s, swore they endured multi-day bombardments around the village of Olau, now Owawa, Poland, in March 1945. Yet German artillery records show only a handful of batteries in the sector, and captured material after the battle was negligible. One Soviet officer described heavy-caliber barrages from mobile railguns, weapons long since dismantled. Another recalled being ordered to storm a fortified village, only to find it abandoned, its defenders vanished without trace. The mystery deepens in Soviet archival silences. The official campaign history of the First Ukrainian Front, published in Moscow in 1964, makes no mention of phantom resistance in Silesia. Pages covering the Olau sector are unusually brief, as if compressed to erase details. Requests to examine the original files in Podolsk have been denied, with references to sensitive content. Some researchers suspect the Soviets suppressed the story to conceal the extent to which they had been deceived by German psychological warfare. Others suggest something more troubling, that the Soviets themselves captured and exploited elements of the deception program after the war, folding it into their own doctrine of maskirovka. Scattered testimonies suggest a core of truth. A Waffen-SS signals officer, interrogated by the US Counterintelligence Corps in May 1945, admitted that dummy traffic networks were operated out of Breslau, transmitting messages for divisions that did not exist. He claimed entire phantom units were created on paper only, with fake requisition forms, payrolls, and strength reports circulated through Wehrmacht channels. Soviet codebreakers, overwhelmed by volume, incorporated the false reports into their intelligence. The Russians believed they faced 30 divisions, the officer said. In reality, we had fewer than 10. His statements, though consistent with deception tactics, were dismissed at the time as boasting. Yet there are darker fragments. A 1947 CIA report references rumors that Waffen-SS units in Silesia had employed chemical smoke generators and experimental acoustic devices to simulate larger forces. The report was filed under unverified, but cross-referenced to German research into sound cannons and illusion warfare. Though never proven, such devices could explain why Soviet veterans recalled the rumble of tanks and artillery when none were found. By the war's end, Breslau itself became a fortress, holding out until May 6, 1945. Soviet divisions encircling the city still recorded resistance from units that cannot be accounted for in German order of battle records. The 11th SS Panzergrenadier Brigade appears on Red Army maps as late as April 1945, noted as destroyed near Neisse, though no such brigade ever existed. After the surrender, no officers or men of that formation were captured. Why then, after victory, did the Soviets not trumpet their defeat of these phantom divisions? The absence of mention suggests embarrassment. The deception had worked too, well, forcing Soviet commanders to overcommit forces against ghosts, slowing their advance. The erasure from Soviet records is consistent with Stalin's paranoia over admitting mistakes, but it also raises the possibility that some elements of Schattenheer were too valuable to discard. A defector from the GRU in 1951 claimed that Soviet intelligence studied German deception in Silesia as a model for their Cold War disinformation campaigns. The files, he said, remained sealed in Moscow under special significance. What survives today are fragments, OSS cables, British War Office assessments, and Soviet veterans' contradictory testimonies. Together, they sketch the outline of an operation designed to weaponize absence. Absent divisions, Absent artillery, absent soldiers. A force that tied down entire Soviet armies while existing only as shadows. The Ghost Army of Silesia was not a battle, but an illusion. It lingers not on the maps of 1945, but in the empty spaces of archives, in the erasures and silences where history should be. What was real and what was phantom may never be untangled. What is certain is that tens of thousands of Soviet troops marched against divisions that never existed, bled against fire that came from nowhere, and fought shadows until the Reich itself collapsed. The war ended, but the shadows remained. In the winter of 1946, months after Germany's formal surrender, Allied technical intelligence teams combed the remnants of the Reich in search of laboratories, factories, and secret weapons caches. The mission, officially called the Combined Intelligence Objectives Subcommittee, CIOS, aimed to secure German scientific research before it could be looted by the Soviets or disappear into the black markets of occupation. It was during one such survey in the Austrian Alps that investigators stumbled upon an abandoned site that would later acquire the codename Morgenstern. The official records of this discovery are fragmentary, scattered across British, American, and French archives, but together they tell of a laboratory built for purposes no one ever fully admitted. The facility was located near the spa town of Bad Gastein, buried in a partially collapsed tunnel system originally dug as part of an unfinished hydroelectric project. Local villagers, interviewed in early 1946 by US Army intelligence, reported that in late 1944, German military trucks began arriving in the valley under heavy guard. Supplies were brought at night, covered in tarpaulin, and guarded by men in black SS uniforms. Several villagers recalled hearing drilling and blasting deep in the mountains, as if chambers were being expanded. One shepherd reported the sound of machinery, like a generator, humming day and night. When the Americans arrived months later, they found the outer tunnels partially sealed by explosives, the entrance disguised with rubble. A CIOS inspection, team led by Major William H. Borden of the US Army Ordnance Department, gained entry in May 1946. His preliminary report, preserved in redacted form at the US National Archives, describes burned fragments of technical documentation, chemical, flasks shattered by fire, and one large generator coil fused by extreme heat. The most telling discovery, however, was a stack of blueprints half-charred, but legible enough to reveal the codename Project Morgenstern. The diagrams depicted unfamiliar apparatus, long tubular emitters mounted on tripods, connected by heavy cabling to generator banks. Marginal notes referred to Hochfrequenzsender für Störwirkung, high-frequency transmitters for interference effects. What these devices were meant to do is still debated. The report speculates that the apparatus might have been intended as experimental radar jammers designed to disrupt Allied airborne navigation. Yet a second classified addendum written by a British signals specialist, Captain A.J. Merriman, described the design as unsuited for jamming and potentially configured as a directional acoustic emitter, in other words, a so-called sound cannon. His analysis concluded that the projected energy output, if functional, could disable electrical ignition systems at short range, particularly in armored vehicles. In layman's terms, a prototype directed energy weapon capable of disabling tanks without direct fire. The CIOS team secured what equipment remained and forwarded it to US custody in Frankfurt. Within days, the site was ordered sealed by dynamite under US Army Corps of Engineers supervision. British officers on the ground complained that they had been excluded from deeper sections of the tunnel complex. According to one witness, Captain Hugh Trevor Roper, later famous for investigating Hitler's death, American engineers refused access to chambers beyond the first collapsed corridor. They gave the impression of already knowing what they wanted, Trevor Roper recalled years later. And once they had it, the place was obliterated. Local villagers insist the laboratory was not completely abandoned. In interviews conducted, decades later, Several claimed that armed patrols continued to visit the site until at least 1952, long after US forces had supposedly withdrawn from Austria. Some remembered strange aerial activity in the valley, low-flying C-47 transport planes circling at night. Others swore they saw trucks unloading crates at the sealed tunnel entrance, guarded by men speaking English, not German. No official occupation. Records mention such operations. The Americans never publicly acknowledged Morgenstern. No declassified US Air Force or Army ordnance documents refer to it by name. Yet tantalizing hints remain. A 1949 Rand Corporation study on acoustic and microwave weapons research includes a cryptic note: prior German work in high-frequency mechanical disruption, Austria, 1944-45, relevance uncertain. Another reference appears in a 1951 CIA memorandum, declassified in the 1990s, which lists Morgenstern, Bad Gastein, under a section titled Captured Special Projects, Status Resolved. The accompanying text is missing, removed under national security exemption. What is certain is that the project had ties to the SS. Surviving fragments of correspondence between Heinrich Himmler's Ahnenerbe Research Organization and the Reich Main Security Office (RSHA) reference tests in the Alpine installation. The exact nature of the tests remains obscured, but one letter mentions field evaluations against armored engines. Another fragment notes operational delays due to premature circuit burnout. Whether any of the devices were ever successfully tested in combat conditions is unknown. No records of deployment exist, but the Germans had a history of compartmentalizing failed projects. Why would the site have been suppressed so completely? One explanation is technological embarrassment, prototype weapons that never worked as intended. Another, more unsettling possibility is that the Americans successfully integrated elements of the research into their own post-war programs. Indeed, Project Paperclip saw dozens of German scientists relocated to the United States, where they contributed to aerospace, rocketry, and unconventional weapons. If Morgenstern represented even a partial breakthrough in acoustic or electromagnetic weaponry, it would have been a prize worth concealing. The strongest evidence that the story did not end in 1946 lies in Austrian police reports from the early 1950s. Several entries describe villagers being detained near the sealed tunnels by foreign military personnel, though no occupation forces officially remained in the sector after 1950. One report, dated March 1951, mentions unidentified Americans confiscating photographic plates from a local geologist who had been surveying the mountain. The plates were never returned. That report was classified confidential until 1978. Today, the tunnels near Bad Gastein remain collapsed, officially inaccessible. Occasional rumors surface of spelunkers breaking through into chambers filled with rusted equipment and scorched walls, but none have been confirmed. The Austrian government denies knowledge of any surviving installations. Researchers who request documents from US or British archives are told that files on Project Morgenstern do not exist. Yet the scattered references in burned blueprints, in CIOS reports, in RAND studies and CIA memos tell otherwise. What Morgenstern was, in its final form, may never be conclusively known. A radar jammer? A sound cannon? A precursor to directed energy weapons? Or simply a failed experiment abandoned in the chaos of defeat? The silence surrounding the project suggests it was considered sensitive long after the war ended. Whether that sensitivity stemmed from genuine military value or from the desire to bury an embarrassing dead end is impossible to prove. All that remains is the shadow of a laboratory buried in an Alpine mountain, sealed with explosives, erased from history. Yet the echoes of Morgenstern persist in hints of classified technology, in villagers' memories of midnight patrols, and in the stubborn gaps of the archival record. The Reich may have fallen, but its secrets did not all die in 1945. Some were sealed away under stone and silence, waiting to be forgotten. The story of the so-called Riga Black Vault begins not in wartime Germany, but in the tense shadows of the Cold War. In 1961, a minor KGB archivist in Latvia defected to the West, carrying with him only fragments of a larger, hidden catalogue. His name, withheld in declassified CIA summaries, is known only through a codename, Vyatka. According to his testimony, deep within the Latvian SSR's Ministry of State Security building in Riga existed a compartmentalized archive, kept apart from standard KGB files, containing wartime intelligence records smuggled from Berlin in 1945. These records, he claimed, included transcripts of Abwehr interrogations, secret German inventories, and detailed maps of hidden weapons depots scattered across Eastern Europe. The Soviets referred to this cache in internal shorthand as Chorny Archiv, the Black Archive, though Western intelligence quickly adopted the name Black Vault. What little surfaced from the defector's account was enough to alarm Washington and London. Among the fragments he carried was a handwritten index page dated July 1945, listing Object 74 near Krakow and Object 92 vicinity of Königsberg, each followed by technical annotations in German and Russian. Object 74 was described as containing Handwaffenrakete Type D, a man-portable rocket weapon, test version, years ahead of anything NATO had fielded. The notation in Russian read simply, secured, transfer to Moscow pending. The Seychai index also contained references to Oranienburg material and SS Sonderprojekt Radium, neither of which were explained. The documents, though fragmentary, were authentic enough for the CIA to launch immediate verification missions. Between 1961 and 1963, small CIA and West German B&D teams were dispatched to southern Poland under deep cover. Their objective? To locate Object 74. Initial intelligence suggested the depot was buried in an abandoned limestone quarry east of Krakow. But when the teams arrived, the area was already under Polish military control, cordoned off with barbed wire. Satellite imagery confirmed underground excavation activity, though the Polish government insisted it was merely a mine redevelopment project. Requests for on-site inspection under cultural preservation pretexts were denied. By late 1963, the zone was officially declared a restricted military engineering site. Whatever was there, NATO never got near it. The Americans suspected that Moscow had removed the material years earlier. This theory was supported by Soviet transport records obtained through West German agents that showed unusual rail traffic from southern Poland to Smolensk in August 1945. Yet no manifest listed cargo. Cross-referencing with captured German documents revealed that SS Obergruppenführer Hans Kammler, architect of numerous secret projects, had ordered evacuations of weapons prototypes into Silesia and Galicia during the Reich's final months. It is possible Object 74 was one such cache, secured before the Soviets arrived. What was inside, however, remains speculation. The defector also described the structure of the Riga archive itself. Files were arranged by objects, German depots, and operations, Soviet intelligence seizures. Each entry included German originals, Soviet translations, and field interrogation transcripts. The archive was treated as if it contained treasures, he told his CIA debriefers. Access required signatures from Moscow. He also claimed that in 1957, the archive was relocated from Riga to Moscow, its index destroyed in Riga to obscure the trail. Whether the Soviets truly transferred everything or left fragments behind remains unknown. Western intelligence gave the fragments the highest classification. An internal CIA memo dated December 1961 states, if verified, Black Vault materials indicate early Soviet possession of advanced man-portable rocket designs, predating NATO equivalents by at least 15 years. The memo warned that the Soviets' early adoption of compact anti-tank rockets may have stemmed not solely from indigenous research, but from captured German prototypes. A British Defence Intelligence Staff report from 1962 added, there is circumstantial evidence of VX and sarin precursor formulas in vault references. These precede by several years our own documented awareness of such compounds. If true, the Black Vault represented not just a weapons cache, but a blueprint of the entire post-war arms race. And yet, for all its implications, the trail went cold. By 1965, CIA search teams had been recalled, unable to penetrate Polish or Soviet control of suspected sites. The defector Viatka was resettled in the United States under a new identity, his testimony quietly buried under compartmented special access programs. By the 1970s, even his existence was all but forgotten. Official histories of German weapons research mention no such depots near Krakow, and Soviet archives released after 1991 contain no reference to Kioni Archive. It is as though the Black Vault never existed. But traces remain. In 1993, Latvian historians combing through newly opened KGB files in Riga discovered a burned fragment of an index card referencing JARC. Transferred 1957. The card listed several objects, including 74, 92, and 118. The notation Moskva Osobiyai, Moscow Special, was scrawled at the bottom. When Western researchers petitioned for access to Moscow's holdings, Russian authorities denied the existence of such materials. Requests under the 1990s archival agreements were returned with the statement, "No file with this designation allocated." The silence, as ever, was telling. If the Black Vault truly contained the most sensitive of captured German intelligence, its concealment makes sense. Admitting its existence would mean acknowledging that much of the Soviet Union's Cold War arsenal had roots not only in domestic innovation, but in stolen enemy work. It would also mean admitting that the West knew, at least in outline, of this transfer since 1961, and yet concealed it from public record. For NATO, the embarrassment would be equal. To admit they had failed to prevent the Soviets from looting the Reich's most advanced weapons. The most haunting detail comes from a single surviving CIA note dated 1964. It reads, "Vault may include records of Einsatzgruppen mass graves, Eastern Poland, cross-referenced with object depots. Possible intentional commingling of war crimes files with weapons archives to ensure permanent suppression." If true, the Black Vault may have been designed not merely to store weapons intelligence, but to bury atrocities alongside technology, making them inseparable, permanently locked under state secrecy. To this day, no one outside Moscow can say with certainty what lay within the Riga Black Vault. Was it a myth constructed by a frightened defector, or was it the index of a hidden archive that shaped the entire Cold War arms race? What endures are the gaps, erased files, destroyed indexes, denied access, and fragments that survived only by chance. The story sits uneasily between history and conspiracy, its weight measured not in what is known, but in what is missing. Like the war itself, it casts a shadow long after the guns fell silent, a reminder that some files are not lost, they are buried. The curtain of secrecy never lifts, it only shifts, revealing enough to unsettle, never enough to close the case. Beneath the official stories lies an undercurrent of absences. Names erased, maps with empty coordinates, operations that breathe, only in rumor. These shadows persist, feeding on our doubt, reminding us that some wars never end, they change shape. To follow them is to risk being consumed, for once you glimpse what was hidden, the silence itself begins to speak back.